think we're live. Okay, so we're going to start the session. Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending wherever you are on the globe. I would like to welcome you all to our session, Accelerating Sustainable Transformation of the Textile Sector. I'll just stop sharing. My name is Savadar, and I am a Water Stewardship Basin Coordinator at WWF Germany. I will be moderating today's session, which is based on panel session format. Our panel is composed of 4 speakers, and it is my pleasure to introduce them to all of you. We have with us Kim Hellstrom, who is Strategy Lead for Water at H&M Group. We have Laurent Arnon, who is the Private Sector Advisor at WaterAid. We have Marika Schrettmeyer, who is Lead Manager Environmental Protection at Cheapo. And finally, we have Pai Luthra, who is a Global Apparel and Textiles Lead at WWF Italy. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our speakers and also thank them for what I'm anticipating to be a very engaging discussion. Just to give you all a bit of background, last year, a coalition of organizations, including WWF, Cheapo, H&M, and WaterAid, published the open letter demanding the fashion, textile, and apparel sector to build back better and more sustainably in the face of COVID-19. Now, 1 year later, we see that the need for businesses to step up and realign their strategies with the most pressing environmental and economic concerns is even more evident. So today's session is actually a follow-up on the open letter and will be focused on 3 core thematic areas of the open letter, which are sustainability commitments, ecosystem resilience, and green finance. Now, before I move forward, I have an announcement to make for all our attendees. Our attendees are welcome to post any questions in the chat box on Bankable. Please note you will not be able to post any questions in Zoom because the chat function has been disabled, but you're free to post any questions on Bankable, and we'll get back to your questions towards the end of the session. Thank you for your cooperation. Just one more announcement. We do have a poll running on Bankable, and I'll encourage all attendees to participate in the poll. It is just a small fun quiz, and I will reveal the results once we get to our second theme, that is ecosystem resilience and biodiversity. Now, without further ado, I'll move to my speakers and open the discussion. So to start off, I will invite panelists to share the journey of water of their respective organizations, how water became a part of their sustainability agenda, and what are some of the challenges that they faced along the way. Kim, maybe we'll start with you. Would you like to share the water stewardship journey of H&M with us?
Absolutely, I can try. If we go back, our whole sustainability journey really started in the late 90s. The specific water focus came up around 2008. And we, of course, came from almost zero. So we had initial learning that came from many different external stakeholders. We got involved with partners like CV and IFC and Solidaridad. And of course, that led us to set initial actions and around reducing water consumption. Then in 2011, we signed a partnership with WWF, where we really looked much deeper into all the risks throughout the supply chain and on a water basin level. And we also then worked out our first actual roadmap in 2007 with the support of WWF. And this included current goals such as around recycling and efficiency and quality. We supported WWF, or we supported each other with data and technology for the water risk filter that is out there. So we tried to take step by step in the ladder that WWF is using for water stewardship. So that's my short answer.
Great, thank you so much, Kim, for sharing this story with us. Next, I'll move on to Marika. Marika, water has been Cheapo's one of primary environmental focuses. So would you give us a brief overview of how Cheapo embarked on its water stewardship journey and how's it going so far?
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Saba. Maybe to get started, for those of you who are not familiar with the brand Cheapo, let me quickly introduce, because I always kind of struggle to explain our special business module. So Cheapo is basically a multi-channel retailer, and our assortment includes coffee as well as a weekly changing range of non-food products and services, for example, textiles and hard goods. So we are at the same time a food and a non-food brand. And yeah, I would like to share a few insights from the Cheapo water journey. I mean, sustainable water management has become one of our strategic priorities, as you mentioned, Saba. And I guess we all know that fresh water is becoming scarce due to population growth, increased consumption, climate change. And by growing coffee and cotton and by manufacturing our non-food products, Cheapo is not only partly responsible for the pollution and scarcity of water, but we are also directly affected by the risks, like, for example, water shortages and supply chain disruption. So water is a key resource for businesses, and like most other brands, also Cheapo is facing risk connected to water quality and also water availability. And the Cheapo water strategy is based on SDG 6. So our water strategy covers not only water pollution, but also water stewardship and wash. So basically we have 3 pillars in our water strategy. And historically, we have started with water pollution. I think like most other textile brands have. In 2011, Greenpeace issued a wake-up call to the fashion industry with the launch of its detox campaign. And Cheapo joined this movement in 2014. That was when we committed to phase out hazardous chemicals in textile production. And then over the past years, Cheapo worked on many key tasks arising from the commitment. And I would say that we have made relevant progress to clean up the fashion industry. And due to limited time, I don't want to go into too much detail in our detox program, but rather explain our general water journey. Because we, as Cheapo didn't stop with detox and water pollution, we just recently also added wash to fully fulfill the SDG 6, meaning water, sanitation and hygiene. And we have just recently started a project in South Ethiopia with our coffee farmers. And there the project objective is to improve the lives of coffee growing communities in Ethiopia with access to clean water. So it's a drinking water project. And then also, and I think this is kind of special or still kind of new, especially in the German textile industry, is that since 2018, Cheapo has also integrated water stewardship into the water strategy. So that's meaning that we are going beyond water management at factory level, just looking at water pollution, but we also address water management in the river basins, involving stakeholders, and considering the individual catchment context. Yeah, so we have integrated water stewardship as an innovative approach to manage water collectively. And maybe to also quickly summarize how we did start to integrate water stewardship in our water strategies. So the implementation of corporate water stewardship started with understanding the individual water risks and business impacts. For that, we used the WWF water risk filter to evaluate where in our supply chain we have the highest risks and what kind of risk we have. And from there, it was then all about turning risk into opportunity and action. So this was kind of the basis for improvement measures and for projects on the ground. And also to share the current status, we are in a partnership with WWF since 2019. And so far we have joined 2 multi-stakeholder projects for water stewardship in China and Turkey. And this is actually just the starting point. We aim to have stewardship projects implemented in all high-risk basins until 2025. So maybe just as a quick snapshot into our water activities.
Thank you so much, Marika, for walking us through step by step of the Cheapo's journey. And I think it's very inspiring to see what Cheapo has done so far. Next, I'll move on to Pyle. While WWF has been working in this water stewardship space since over a decade. So I think it would be nice if you could help us understand what WWF has done so far and how it is driving collective action in water stewardship by engaging the private sector.
Sure. Thanks, Saba, and hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you all today. So yes, to give a bit of an overview of our work, WWF has worked in the apparel and textile sector for a number of years. It's one of our priority sectors, actually. We work in partnership with many apparel and textile brands on sustainability issues in their value chains, everything from raw materials like cotton to wet processing in facilities, and to collective action and up to governance. So we're quite active in this space on both a global level and then down to a ground level. And as Saba mentioned, we've been driving the adoption and implementation of water stewardship since 2011. We work closely with our textile brand partners in 5 priority river basins. That's the Taihu Basin in China, the Indus Basin in Pakistan, the Greater Mekong Delta in Vietnam, the Buk-Menderes River Basin in Turkey, and the Noyland Bhavani Basin in India. And each of these basins is a major textile hub in its country. And they're also global biodiversity hotspots. They're critical for ecosystem services for the regions, and they're especially vulnerable to impacts from the textile industry. Issues include everything from severe water pollution to wetland degradation and overexploited groundwater. So we work with our partners and their suppliers to help enable water stewardship and ensure water security. And as Marika mentioned, we've developed multi-stakeholder platforms in each of these countries to drive collective action and influence local governance in favor of policies that help restore rivers. And then, more specifically, in China, Vietnam, and Pakistan, we're working exclusively with companies on improving their supply chains, which starts with improving suppliers' water and energy efficiency, and then helping them reduce hazardous chemicals. And then in India and Turkey, we've taken a landscape approach. So along with working with our partners on cleaner production, like we're doing in the other basins, we're also engaging them in, with them directly in conservation work and in the health and management of ecosystems and biodiversity. And then in addition, WWF Turkey also works with smallholder farms on organic and regenerative cotton as part of their water stewardship program. So that gives a bit of an overview of our work. And Marika and Kim touched a little bit on the water stewardship kind of journey and the ladder. And basically, to sum up, I'm sure most of our viewers are familiar, but water stewardship starts with understanding your own risks and dependencies, and then taking internal action, but then moving on to collective action and influencing governance. So, and that part, the last steps are really key. So I thought it might be good just to share an example from our work of how collective action can, really bring everything together. So in the Noyland Bhavani Basin, WWF India is developing an invasive species management plan in the Nilgiri Mountains. 90% of the native grasslands there have been taken over by invasive species. They cause significant damage and extract more water than native plants, and that leaves behind less soil moisture and reduced water flows. So WWF India is working together with local partners, the forest department, and local communities to figure out how to restore the habitat. One of the invasives can be used for making biomass briquettes for fuel. And this has led to interest from, in the local community to remove the plants themselves and make briquettes to sell to local industries, including the textile suppliers in the basin, who are actually quite interested in purchasing it from the community. And even some of our textile partners are potentially interested in using the wood for their products. So, working with stakeholders through collective action can lift a whole region, and you can help ensure water security and bring back river flows while also sustaining livelihoods. And you can also see, the direct connection between what's happening in the mountains with the amount of water that's available for textile operations downstream. So it's really important for all stakeholders to work together in water stewardship. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Payal, for elaborating what WWF is doing. And I think it was very interesting to hear of an example of collective action that's happening in India. And now move on. Whenever we talk about water, there's one thing that comes up often, and that is access to water and sanitation and hygiene, WASH, or lack thereof. Laurent here today will help us understand how WASH and water stewardship play together, and how Water Aid is facilitating textile companies to incorporate WASH into their water strategies. Laurent?
Thank you, Saba. And for those who don't know Water Aid, I have a few slides as well, which I can share with you to present Water Aid first, and then our approach to working with businesses with water stewardship and the inclusion of WASH in water stewardship. And as you can imagine, water is really at the core of what we do. So we are the leading water sanitation and hygiene NGO working globally. We work in more than 34 countries. And with our partners, we have also supply chain based partnerships, which are related to how we work with businesses directly in their supply chain, some of them in the apparel sector, and where we're trying to make sure that workers have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, and making sure that the businesses are also responsible for improving access to those facilities and to this basic human rights to their for their workers. That's definitely what we believe is a business responsibility for their workers to ensuring this access to water, sanitation, and hygiene as part of a more, I would say, global water stewardship strategy. So the connection, of course, between the activities of businesses and the impact that businesses have on water and the availability of water as well for the surrounding communities are huge. And so that's why we believe that water and that WASH needs to be one key element of a water stewardship strategy. And if we go back to the definition itself of water stewardship, and I'll just stop sharing my screen here for 1 second. So if we go back to the definition of water stewardship itself, and that as it's defined as well by the Alliance for Water Stewardship, WASH is one of the 5 components and one of the 5 outcomes of a water stewardship strategy. So it's really a recognition that water sanitation and hygiene needs to be included in a water stewardship approach. And this has been probably even more I would say highlighted in the last 18 months, where businesses have realized that because of COVID and because of the lack of access to water and hygiene and soap, people can't even wash their hands. So businesses have been impacted not only because the lack of access to water was difficult, but as well because workers were at risks because they don't have places to wash their hands because there's no water. So there's absolutely a need for a business to look into those areas to ensure a more sustainable, but as well a more resilient supply chains. And just discussing some of the specific aspects of water stewardship for the apparel sector. And I'll go back with one slide which explain a little bit our approach as well and our work more specifically with the apparel sector, where we see that this is a sector which is definitely water intensive, and this water needs to be actually shared or actually they compete for water with the surrounding communities, more specifically in areas such as South Asia, which account for 60% of the export of garment globally. There's definitely areas there where the risk of non-access to water and the risk of WASH, I would say more related risk, is higher. If we look more specifically at, I don't know if you can see it properly, but the little table we have on the side of the graph, you can see that there's in Pakistan, 60% of the population doesn't have access to, I would say, a continuous source of unsafe source of water. It's 34% in India. the access to hand washing facilities is also very difficult in those locations because of the lack of water. And so those are elements which put businesses at a higher risks, not only because they're workers and not only a risk for people, but as well a risk for the workers who don't have access to those facilities, and it makes it difficult to maintain a good health and a good, I would say, environment for communities to thrive, but as well thrive in terms of being able to go to work. If you don't get good water, if you don't, and you can't wash your hands, if you don't have proper sanitation, then it's a source of diseases. It's a source of workers being unable to go to work and to be able to have access to the resources they need, of course, to live, but as well disturbing supply chain and factories, which are suffering from, of course, the reduction of worker absenteeism because of health. And this burden is even more important for women, who are usually the one taking care of fetching water in the morning and taking the time to do it, but as well of women staying at home when their children are sick. And we know that almost 75% of the garment workers are women. So this has also a direct impact on the ability of the apparel sector to work with a more, I would say, smooth approach when people don't have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. We've seen as well the effect of climate change, which is increasing all those issues, but also making new issues appear in the garment sector. And then lastly, we've seen in the last 18 months the impact of COVID-19 on supply chain and how this has disrupted as well supply chain. And in the apparel supply chain and apparel factories, we know how much it's I would say a high risk context with crowded factories, with a high touch type of and high contact type of work, and where when people don't have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, and in this case more specifically water and hand hygiene, it makes it very difficult for a company and for a factory to maintain its activity. And in the perspective and the way we work with businesses, we've definitely seen I would say a journey on how businesses in the apparel industry are thinking about water, sanitation, and hygiene. Maybe I would say 10 years ago or 5 years ago, it was something more philanthropic. This is something that companies were working as a nice thing to do or a right thing to do, which is what they do. It's the right thing to do, but it's also something which is core business. And we've seen it with the impact of COVID-19. This is something that is important for the business to making sure that in their supply chain, people have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene to be able to, I would say, manage and mitigate those business risks. And that's why the apparel sector became quite an important sector for WaterAid to look and to collaborate with, just because those different, I would say, risks that apparel businesses are actually faced with because of the location, because of the specificities of the supply chain, because of the specificities of the workforce. We realize that this is an area where there's still a lot to do, and where businesses that actually are at risk need to take action. And this action needs to be taken in the supply chain, so in the factories, but as well in the communities where workers are living. Because if workers have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene when they are at work, and then they come back to their community and they can't wash their hands, or they can't have access to a proper source of clean water, then the risk of diseases or spreading any viruses is still there. And so the impact on workers themselves and on their right to have access to those basic, I would say, human rights, but as well the impact on businesses is even more important. So that's why we always look at this dual approach between communities and factories. So when a company needs to have looking at improving access to water, sanitation, and hygiene, it needs to be done within the fence, but as well outside of the fence, to be able to mitigate those physical risks of non-access to water, so workers not able to come to work, or because they don't have access to water. There's also the regulatory risks related to non-access to water for workers, for a business. There are accreditation, there are rules, there are basically the human right to access to water and sanitation. So that's more on the regulatory elements. And then there's also the reputational element, which is important for the license to operate for businesses and making sure that they have a good approach to water stewardship, which includes wash access for workers in the workplace and in the communities, but also looking at how this impacts as well the business reputation and the brand's reputation for their consumers. And consumers are today, even more than ever, waiting for brands to take action and to be responsible within their supply chain. I think when we say businesses need to build back better, and in the apparel industry, we want businesses to build back better. We want them to be more conscious and more responsible for the workers in their supply chain. So that's, in a nutshell, maybe how we work with businesses, and I can come with some few examples later in the discussion. I'll be happy to share with you.
Thank you so much, Laurent, for your elaborate response, and also for showing how Bosch is critical for water stewardship, and a holistic approach to water stewardship includes prioritizing community needs. So thank you so much for your perspective. Now, building on what our panelists have already shared with us, I will move on to our first theme of the session. Recently, companies, NGOs, and other fashion-related coalitions have been focusing a lot on sustainability commitments as a pathway towards transitioning towards sustainable practices. So I'd invite my panelists to share what their organizations are doing with regards to sustainability commitments. Kim, maybe we'll start with you again. And would you like to share what, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No. Sure. You can start with me. I mean, we first of all, we have to address the fact that we are active in an industry that is very dependent on water, that uses a lot of water and creates a lot of discharge and dirty water, leaving massively negative traces around the facilities where we source from, and which has an impact on societies around it. And our business should say like this: our current business model can today not survive without water. That's obvious, and that of course has to change, and it has to change quickly, and it has to change in many different ways. There are no silver bullet. So all our water-related performance, like efficiency and quality and recycling, has been embedded in what we call a sustainability index, or a sustainability index score that each supplier receives depending on the setup they have and on the performance they have, and the tests that are done daily. So it works like, for our business part, the better the score, and I should also mention, of course, that it's not only water here. We have the whole sustainability scale in it. So water is one part, and then we have climate, we have all the social questions. So but the higher rating within the sustainability index a specific facility receives, the more business we will steer towards them. So that is how we reward them. So and we're currently working or remodeling our water strategy, a completely new water strategy. Hopefully, we have an ambition that it should be industry leading. We will act both on facility level and basin level, and we're trying to integrate this through our organization and maximize the positive collaboration also with external stakeholders. But mainly, this water is a very production-oriented focus for us. It's in our production organization where, you know, almost all water impact is happening. So by doing so and inviting external stakeholders, we can also achieve progress in our thoughts, in our minds, in our mindset, and we can also try to integrate it with all the investments that are planned now for on the climate side, where we have set out for creating external bonds, and we have created a internal carbon pricing, and basically making sure that the funding is coming in and then connected to water and trying to pull off the two together, so to speak. And through this job has been done in a transparent process, including organizations. Of course, WWF is always there, and they are our watchdog, which is basically their job. WaterAid, we've also had support from WaterAid. And if I should go into a little bit about do's and don'ts for us, the main focus is really to get localized action plans for us, to get as specific as possible down to a specific area. It's not like climate, where you can have a global impact and you can kind of move your actions around. It doesn't really matter. A water strategy in India, for example, where water is a scarcity, water is scarce, and that's the problem. The strategy there must look completely different than for Bangladesh, that has way too much water, and thereby completely different challenges. And I should also mention that our first of all, our recycling goal is, of course, one of the strongest of all our goals. But of course, we need to do more and push for constant innovations. And as I usually say, where there is no price on water, it's difficult to work with recycling of water, because that doesn't really make sense from a financial perspective. Now, this has really been a journey for our suppliers, and we must enable finances for the investments that is needed, and we can't deny our history. We can't think that everything happens in a week. It has to be able to take time, and the important thing is that we see constant improvements, that we constantly push and support and work together with our suppliers. And also, we must combine all these actions on facility level also with new business models. We must focus on circularity, resell, because if we don't need to produce something, but we can sell it again, that is, the amazing for when it comes to the water impact, which is then goes down to basically nothing. So reselling is a big part of our future turnover. And lastly, let's not forget also the new materials. The development of new material is a major focus for us. We have laboratories, and we have a quite efficient process of taking newly developed materials, push them forward into our brands, experiment with them, and then industrialize them to make sure that the impact and those materials are vastly better than the existing one. With almost no CO2 impact and almost no water usage. So it has a lot of different inputs and a lot of different types of answering to that question. But my main thing is that it has to be very local. The solution is not a global when it comes to water. It's very local.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cam. And one thing that's so encouraging to hear from what you've shared is that today businesses are realizing the impacts of their operations, and they understand the need to change their current business models. And I'm sure other businesses who are just, and companies are just starting out on their journey, they can take ideas from what H&M has done. So thank you so much. Next, I'll move on to Marika, and you've already shared with us what Cheapo has been doing on water stewardship. How do you think that water stewardship helps companies respond to their operational risks? And can you talk a little about contextual targets, science-based targets? What are these? What is the difference between them?
Yes. Well, first of all, we also have a huge sustainability team at Cheapo working on many different sustainability topics. And I would really like to focus on water here, and within water on water stewardship, since it's quite a new concept. And yeah, therefore I would like to go into more detail. What does stewardship even mean? And then of course it is super important that there's a connection between all the different environmental and human rights topics. So for example, connecting water pollution issues also with climate change and biodiversity. So, but with just focusing on water stewardship, since it's such a new concept, first of all, what does stewardship even mean? Stewardship means the responsible planning and management of resources. And if you have a project and you want to call it stewardship, what are important aspects to make a project a stewardship project? So first of all, it needs to address local water challenges that are shared with local communities and stakeholders. So it has to be a process where stakeholders are involved. It has to go beyond farm or a factory gate and address the entire river basin. So that is actually an approach that is quite new to all the water pollution detox program and detox projects work we do since many years, where we really simply focus on improving the chemical management and factory level. And then another important aspect is that stewardship projects are set up according to the catchment context. And so that is actually kind of new. Back in the days, most water strategies were focusing on just simply reducing the water footprint. And we know that Kim has already outlined this, that water challenges vary substantially depending on the local context. So one factory in one catchment could face water scarcity challenges, whilst the same type of factory, both, for example, dyeing factories, another factory in another catchment might face a greater risk of flooding or water pollution. And so because of this contextual nature of water, it is not only, it is not state of the art anymore, it's even highly problematic if a brand is just using a global water management approach, like just reducing the water footprint or just focusing on efficiency measures, because this carries out the risks that saved water resources then even lead to an expansion of production and thus to an overall increase of water consumption overall. So this is also called the rebound effect. So instead, like the more modern or innovative approach on water management requires a contextualization, meaning an adaptation of local conditions of every catchment and the water users in that area. And that's kind of what we as Cheapo see or interpret as water stewardship. So in our new water strategy, context is really a strategic core. So that's quite new. And this is also kind of reflecting the latest discussions in the industry. So lately, 3 different kinds of water targets have emerged. So we have the non-contextual water targets, which is basically a top-down global approach. For example, efficiency measures. Then we have the contextual water targets, where you do a risk analysis, really having individual water strategies for the different areas you have production facilities. And then there's even the science-based approach, science-based water targets, which used to be the context-based water targets. And that is even one level higher, acting within the planetary boundaries. And to maybe give some insights, where are corporate targets heading? I personally feel that today's best practice is still use contextual approach. with piloting the science-based water targets approach. And this is also where Cheapo is at the moment. So we are working with contextual water targets, but we have also become a member of the science-based targets network in December last year. And we're also supporting the development of this new methodology, hoping for many other brands to join this movement.
Great, thank you so much, Marika, to help us understand how water stewardship is important for companies. And it was also wonderful to see that she was participating in devising the methodology of science-based targets. We also hope that more and more companies will join in. Next, I'll move on to Payal. Just recently, WWF, in collaboration with H&M, has released 2 guides which help companies understand how to draft a meaningful and context-specific water strategy and how to set contextual targets. Now, my question to you is how important it is to have a water strategy in place before companies deep dive into contextual targets.
Sure. Yes, so it's really important to have a water strategy in place before developing targets. And I think the key thing to understand is that any company that wants to strengthen its commitment on water should think about devising transformational water strategies that have context at their core, just like what Marika and Kim have said. The strategy should also connect to the company's broader objectives. Companies should realize that water is a strategic opportunity to align to larger corporate goals, like improving your value chain and reputation, building brand trust and loyalty and engagement with customers. So it's much more than just mitigating basin risks. If you have, a standalone water strategy that's focused solely on internal improvement, it isn't going to help companies navigate, the shared and local challenges we have, like water scarcity. So yeah, tying context into an overall strategy is vital. And, also if you don't have that, it's hard for a company to make a case to invest in water stewardship and respond to a collective, challenge related to water. And it's these context-driven actions that are among the most important and the most relevant actions for risk mitigation and ensuring your resilience. So once you understand all of the water challenges that are strategically relevant for your company and your value chain, then you can start to decide which areas are the best to focus on with the resources that you have. You can set meaningful targets that are supported by your strategy. So yeah, start with strategy and then move on to target setting. And as Saba mentioned, WWF has been involved in developing guidance and methodologies for contextual targets and science-based targets for water. And I'd recommend you take a look at the reports that we've recently put out with H&M. We feel there's an urgent need for businesses to shift from being focused only on water efficiency targets to contextual targets, which again, as Marika explained well, are informed by the local basin context. Companies don't have unlimited resources. So if your targets aren't connected to the actual local conditions of a site, you could wind up devoting time and resources to something that's not needed or maybe isn't a priority. And then the water challenges that really need to be addressed, they could be missed. So contextual targets, they help focus limited resources on the most urgent water-related problems in a basin. And this benefits the company, of course, it benefits the freshwater ecosystem. And it also further ensures that the positive impacts that come from the actions you take, that they reach as many stakeholders as possible. So back to you.
Thank you, Payal. This was very helpful. So Laurent, we've already discussed how Bosch is very critical for ensuring sustainable supply chains. So my question to you now is, how are businesses factoring in social considerations in their water strategies to make them more sustainable?
Sorry, Saba, you were cracking a little bit. Can you please repeat?
Oh, sure. Yes. Sorry, I'm saying that my question to you is, how are businesses factoring in? Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's much better. Sorry, it was probably on my side.
That's right. So how businesses are factoring in social considerations in their water strategies to make their operations more sustainable?
Thanks. Good question. And that's always the balance we want businesses to look into, is to look at not only environmental elements, for example, related to water and conservation and water stewardship, but as well the social element, the social impact that a good water stewardship plan needs to include, as well. As mentioned previously, there's the impact, water usage in a specific location and in a contextualized location has impact on the surrounding communities. Water is a shared resource. And so we always advise as well businesses to look as well at mapping their risks and in those specific areas. So it starts probably, and we have probably very I would say a complementary approach with WWF on those specific aspects, which are more probably environmentally focused, where our perspective it's more on the human side of things. And so looking into that, there's the set of the identification of where are the water and wash risks. So when you look at where are your water risks more specifically, and where are the water risk areas, for example, in some specific key geographies, you should also be looking at where are the wash risks in those geographies. This would most of the time be more or less the same places where there is a water risk. There would be probably wash risks as well related to that, but it's not always exactly the same. So we recommend businesses to look at the GMP data, for example, which is a collection of data with WHO, for example, who looks at access to water, access to sanitation, access to hygiene, to understand where there are some of the lacks or the gaps in access to those services that businesses could be then affected by because of workers' non-access to those services. And then start to look at as well within their supply chain. So this doesn't need to be only in their operation, but as well more generally in their supply chain, and start to put targets as well related not only to environmental and water conservation perspective, but as well target in terms of how can we make sure that workers in our supply chain will actually have access to water, and that we do the right thing for workers, but we do as well the right thing for the business, and ensuring the sustainability and the resilience of the business. So you can have wash targets, for example, related to the number of people you can reach with access to water, or with access to sanitation and hygiene. You can also look at including in your own supplier code of conduct, for example, wash-related targets or wash-related requirements. So making sure that some of your suppliers or all your suppliers are respecting the human rights to water, sanitation, and hygiene. And we recommend businesses to look at the Wash Pledge, for example, which is a commitment that businesses are taking into making sure that water, sanitation, and hygiene is included in the suppliers' priorities, and that suppliers, and not only in the workplace, but as mentioned previously, in the communities where workers are living. And another aspect which we also look into, and where businesses can take a step forward, is as well looking at collective action opportunities, and making sure that those are as well areas where they can get more involved, and as a business, and as they grow on this journey of understanding wash and water related risks. So there are specific I would say collective action initiatives, such as the Water Resilience Coalition, Wash for Work, which is specifically dedicated to looking at wash in the context of supply chain, communities, and workplaces, and trying to reach and join those leading networks where they can exchange, where they can share learnings, and where they can as well learn from others to improve their approach. So it's looking at this integration more specifically of I would say the social aspect and the human aspect of the priorities that businesses have, not only as part of we know that human rights in the apparel sector is very important. So it can be a human right element which contributes to your strategy in terms of respect of human rights in your supply chain. So the human right for accessing water, sanitation, and hygiene. It can be as well something related more specifically to the water strategy and the water stewardship strategy. But as Payal mentioned, we're looking at how those different targets and those different commitments contribute to the overall sustainability strategy and objectives of the business. Wherever I would say the right box is, it's looking at what is the sustainability commitment for the business to take action and to ensure access to for their workers to water, sanitation, and hygiene.
Thank you, Laurent. This has been very helpful. And I'm sure that many companies will now be able to understand that water strategy doesn't only mean water conservation goals or water efficiency goals, but the strategies must also include human aspects to it. So I think that was very insightful. Now, with that, I'll move on to the second theme of our session, that is biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. I announced that we're running a little poll on Bankable, and the results are in. And so the question of the poll was, on average, what % of freshwater biodiversity has declined between 1970 and 2016? And the correct answer is a staggering 84%. This is alarming, but surprisingly, most of the people got that right. 60% of the people who participated in our poll got the answer right. So, I mean, this is amazing. I think most of our attendees are very aware of what's happening in the conservation side of things. So, building on this poll, I will invite Payal to share with us what are the dependencies of businesses on ecosystems and its impacts on biodiversity? What are the opportunities that exist in the sector that companies can invest into to achieve their conservation goals? And what are some of the nature-based solutions which companies can invest into?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, that statistic it's definitely alarming. I mean, it's hard to even comprehend, honestly. And it's a clear indication that we're destroying our freshwater ecosystems. They're critical to our survival, and yet they're just not being valued. But the upside is that there's still time to reverse the biodiversity crisis if we take the right actions. We know that the apparel and textile sector is highly dependent on biodiversity. You know, everything we wear, all of the raw materials used in fashion and to make textiles come from nature. And the production and processing of these materials wouldn't be possible without resources like water, you know, that nature provides. I mean, even through design, you know, fashion continually takes aesthetic inspiration from nature. But despite all these dependencies on biodiversity, the industry's practices are responsible for so many damaging impacts, primarily in the extraction and production of raw materials and the processing, but also in the use phase. You know, for example, agriculture for raw material production results in habitat loss and soil degradation. Water pollution from pesticides and chemicals from wet processing are killing our rivers. Even the enormous amount of textile waste, you know, it reduces biodiversity with every landfill site that's developed. So the industry is very closely linked to nature loss, you know, all across the value chain. But this is also what makes, you know, it a sector that can lead and really bring about change. And in the past few years, it's been really encouraging to see the growing interest that many brands have now in biodiversity. And there are many ways to reduce negative impacts, such as through better sourcing of materials and resource management, using smart product design and circular business models. You know, Kim touched on a lot of this. And these are things that all brands should do. Along with that, we at WWF feel that it's very important for the textile sector to understand that they can improve ecosystem resilience by investing in nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions involve working with nature to address societal challenges, and they provide benefits for both human well-being and biodiversity. They can be cost-effective and provide, you know, environmental, social, and economic benefits all in one package. And that's why they're so key for sustainable development. nature-based solutions have a high potential to contribute to achieving most of the SDG 6 targets, which in turn would have many positive impacts on other SDGs, because water security underpins so many of the goals, like health and well-being and ending poverty. Earlier, I mentioned the ecosystem restoration work being done in India, and that's an example of a nature-based solution. Another example I can give is from our work in Pakistan. In the major textile hub of Faisalabad, there's severe pollution in the water and soil from the discharge of untreated industrial effluents. It's a major threat to public health and livelihoods, and conventional wastewater treatments were found to be inadequate. And they just weren't feasible, for the SMEs to implement due to the high costs. So to clean up the contaminated water, WWF Pakistan looked to nature-based solutions. They, worked through a citywide collaboration that was established through water stewardship, and they introduced floating treatment wetlands, which harness the natural ability of plants and microbes to absorb nutrients and break down contaminants. And the primary result is improved water quality. But there are other significant benefits like carbon sequestration and habitat restoration. Birds had left this area because of the pollution, and they've now returned. And the water is being safely used for irrigation and aquaculture, which keeps more water in the ground. And as we know, this is a water-stressed area. So it's been a successful intervention. And we think that high quality, community-led nature-based solutions should be prioritized whenever possible, because they have so many co-benefits for society and biodiversity. And so we really need brands to invest in them. And I think, and the last thing I'll say is that brands have so much power to influence what people value. If companies tell the stories of what they're doing on biodiversity and why it's important, there's a real opportunity to connect to consumers and raise awareness and get buy-in on circular business models. So, this is another area where brands can do a lot, and it directly relates to biodiversity. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Payal, for giving us examples from the ground and for showing how business operations are impacting biodiversity and ecosystems. So definitely nature-based solutions is something that companies should look into. And building on what Payal has already mentioned, that recently there has been a lot of interest by companies to look into biodiversity conservation. I'll move towards Kim, and because H&M is in the same boat, and it's working on its biodiversity strategy. So Kim, would you like to tell us a little about what is the scope of that work and how other companies can look at the impacts of their operations on ecosystems and biodiversity?
Sure. It's a very big question, of course, but the water and the biodiversity strategies are extremely interlinked as we see them. The freshwater impact is an important area that we recognize in our everyday work. Our water strategy goes hand in hand with our biodiversity ambition, and all our water-related actions should contribute, or at least not make it more difficult for biodiversity stream. And this is especially then for freshwater species, which we have chosen to focus on. However, having said that, while developing the new water strategy now, we have actually taken a clear decision that we will clarify our goals around water even more than before, and we will exclude the impact or the combination with the biodiversity that we had before, trying to make it more crisp and avoid mixing different languages and different communication, both internally and externally. So therefore our new strategy will hopefully be more spot on and easy to understand for customers and for employees. So as a result of that, we will be able to increase the focus also on biodiversity, but we will not mix them or make it blend. So we're strengthening the resources within the biodiversity area. We're spending more money on biodiversity projects, which are the most expensive types of project that you can have. And we are also, of course, quickly learning new things all the time. A good thing with relating water to biodiversity is that biodiversity is specifically easy to connect to our raw materials, and thereby our material strategy, and pushing us, to stop using certain materials, as I mentioned earlier, to develop new innovative materials with lower environmental impact, and as a whole increase the pace of this transition that has to happen, not only for us, but for the whole industry, and for other industries also. So what I'm saying is that we will still refer to our extensive biodiversity ambitions, and we will lean towards the strength of that stream, but we will not dilute this into the different areas, into the different streams. So I think it's important to see also from a corporate perspective, it is clear that biodiversity will be the next big thing. Social focus started our journey within sustainability long time ago. Water took it further, we took it to the next step and really made it, structured, taking in external partners and so on. Then we have the next step became for us climate, with its urgency, with its type of emergency, I should say. But now the next big thing will definitely be biodiversity. And I can also mention that from H&M perspective, we're going through an organizational transformation that started before COVID. It briefly paused during COVID, but then it was rather strengthened instead by the challenges that came up during the pandemic. And the sustainability agenda, the whole overarching sustainability agenda, is now being integrated into every part of the company and pushed out to all the managers in every part of the organization. It's no longer a question for the sustainability department to talk about sustainability. Every single person and every single manager will be measured on sustainability, and the integration will, it will change how we are doing business. It will add thousands of smart people and hopefully increase this pace that I mentioned. The pace of transition or changing our pace to the next level or a higher level. And I also want to mention that I really agree with what Payal said earlier on the power of brands. I mean, we and others, we have a massive reach, and we have to use our communication power or PR or call it whatever you want to reach out, to communicate with the customers, to try to impact their behaviors, to raise awareness. We can do this in our stores. We can do this with different types of language with our different brands. We can do it with our online stores, of course, and we have over 100 million members in our membership scheme. So, I mean, we have a lot of opportunities, and yeah, brands are very powerful and need to use that more actively to improve behavior and change awareness.
Thank you, Kim. And I think most of our panelists and also attendees will agree with you that biodiversity is going to be the next big thing. Yeah. And we look forward to H&M's biodiversity conservation strategy and how your journey will unfold. So Marika, do we see Cheapo venturing into biodiversity conservation sometime in the near future?
Yes, of course. I also agree that biodiversity is, first of all, the next big thing, if you could call it like that, but also it is already today very strongly connected to water stewardship or freshwater projects on the ground. So you have a lot of benefits if you're working on water stewardship already. And I have just shared in my previous answer the importance of moving from non-contextual water targets to contextual water targets, so knowing the local context. And the WWF risk filter is a very important or useful tool to contextualize a brand's individual water risks. And we as Cheapo, we have used the WWF water risk filter to evaluate the context and to identify priority basins and priority risk types. So as the assessment is based on our farmers and factory geographic locations, the results really help us to better understand where and how Cheapo is exposed to water risk. So it is basically a water risk screening of our supplier and farm locations. And as a result, we know, first of all, where we are exposed to water risk. So we know the country level, the basin level, but also really the farm and the factory level, where we need to get started to work on water conservation first. And second of all, and I would even say most importantly, we also know how we are exposed to water risk. So what are the risks at each location? So what are the biggest risk types? Do we have more an issue with wash, or do we have an issue with water quality, or with scarcity, or with flooding, or with any other water related issue? And based on many different water risk types, we can prioritize and consider the local context. And this is something what we do already and where we're working right now. And with biodiversity, we have discussed about this just earlier, we kind of have the similar issue. And that's why we're hoping to use the same tool and also the same methodology to also assess our biodiversity risk. And yeah, we therefore support the development of the biodiversity risk filter and hope to be able to use it soon, as we feel it's important to have the same methodology and approach and not just reinventing the wheel with a wheel or starting another approach for something that is so highly connected to water as well.
Great, thank you, Marijke. And just to flag that we've entered in the last 20 minutes of our session. Laura, and sometimes it's hard to make a direct connection between Bosch and ecosystem resilience. So how do you think these two are connected, and how Bosch can actually serve as an enabling driver for ecosystem conservation?
Thanks, Saba. Yes, it's sometimes not very easy to see the direct connection, but there are probably two elements which need to be highlighted. Is that if you don't have a clean ecosystem, and I would say functioning ecosystem, which allows water, for example, to be clean, proper, or actually treatable, to be consumable by the communities who are actually accessing this water, it's definitely something that makes access to water even more difficult, and even more in the context of climate change, which disrupts as well even more the equilibrium and the balance of ecosystem. So you have I would say the aspect of looking at a balanced ecosystem, which allows better access to water and proper, I would say, clean water for communities to consume. But then on the other way around, if you don't have, for example, good wastewater management, including sanitation facilities, for example, where people might have access or need to have access to decent toilets, where then the wastewater is actually treated and I would say deviated from contaminating the ecosystem. This is also helping making sure that the access to wash is improved through a better, I would say, wastewater approach and a better I would say sanitation perspective related to access to sanitation and toilets, for example. So that's an area where it's definitely a connection that is important to make between access to wash and why ecosystems are so important, but as well why good wash access, so good sanitation access with wastewater, appropriate wastewater, also is something that helps maintain the ecosystem balance. And related to that, the way we work as well, and I wanted to get back maybe to some of the way we work with companies and with factories in relationship to protecting ecosystem, but as well working on water efficiency. There are probably three main areas of work that we do with factories in the apparel industry more specifically. So one is obviously the access to water for workers in the factories and in the communities. The second is looking at water efficient wash initiatives in factories. For example, you may imagine that in times of COVID, where there was access to water and soap to be able to wash their hands, this has increased a lot. I mean, this has increased as well and pushed on water users because people were using much more water to wash their hands. So we needed as well to have water efficient initiatives within factories that helped 10,000 or 80,000 workers to wash their hands, with an opportunity to not push too much on the consumption of water within the factory, and also highlighting the importance of saving water, washing their hands, but also being conscious that water is an important aspect of, I would say, being, I would say, resilient on water conservation and water efficiency. And then the last point is more related to the innovation that factories can actually start to look at, and more specifically in the apparel industry, we need more innovative water solution that can help water conservation initiatives that would actually protect the ecosystem and protect the groundwater, for example, in different countries, but more specifically, I'm thinking about Bangladesh, for example, where we work. So we have a project supported by HSBC, where we have installed rainwater harvesting with factories. And this rainwater harvesting helps factories, and I will just quickly show my screen to show you a picture on how that looks like. So this rainwater harvesting project has been started with the support of HSBC, but as well the factory, Fakir Fashion in this case, has been supporting us, has been supporting and investing as well in making sure that the initiatives could happen. And so the water which is captured by water harvesting system has helped the factory to reduce its groundwater abstraction by 20%. And also help the factory to do some savings. I'm not showing those savings, which are probably not huge for a factory, but when you think in terms of the investment that is actually needed to install a rainwater harvesting system, it means that after a few years, this investment might also be, I would say, reimbursed and covered. So it's also an opportunity for suppliers and factories to invest in, I would say, innovative water solutions that will help water conservation, the protection of ecosystems, and at the same time making sure that there's a more water efficient approach. And the water that is collected can actually be used in toilets and in some of the manufacturing processes, dyeing, for example, which is a major, I would say, consumption of water in the manufacturing of the clothing. And so there's probably here a message where I think it's important to show that factories and with the support of brands, actually brands have also the power and the incentive to be able to collaborate within their supply chain, to work with those factories to adopt the climate adapting technologies such as rainwater harvesting, for example. And the example I gave you is with one factory, but imagine if 1,000 factory or the 4,000 factories in Bangladesh were looking into that, and where we know that access to water, but also the limitation in terms of groundwater abstraction is more and more important to be respected in Bangladesh. Imagine if more factories were doing this. And so we would definitely encourage brands to engage with suppliers and work on pilot projects such as rainwater harvesting, and alongside with NGOs and experts being able to pilot, demonstrate the efficiency of those type of technologies and scale up action. And that leads me probably to another point, which is still related probably to the water conservation and ecosystem, but as well the way that we see those factories, for example, that we know and we've been working with, they are supplying many of those major brands. And so there's an opportunity as well for major brands to get together and work more collaboratively with the support and supporting those specific suppliers, which are shared suppliers in their value chain. And so we're working more specifically at the moment. We're working with WaterAid on initiatives, which is called the Wash Apparel Collective. And the idea of the Wash Apparel Collective is really looking at bringing together brands that are sourcing from the same suppliers to get together and being able to pool fund some initiatives related to wash. Those initiatives can be rainwater harvesting, they can be better access to water, sanitation and hygiene for workers, they can be focused on menstrual hygiene management. But the idea is really to look at more specifically the context where several brands are sourcing from the same suppliers, and we can help and convene brands to work together and be able to invest together to support those suppliers and give this incentive for the apparel sector in Bangladesh more specifically, where we dedicate this action to move forward with new technologies, new approaches, better understanding of wash gaps and how those wash gaps can be I would say supported and filled by better approach from businesses. And there's also an opportunity, I think, there as well, that we want to give brands to share as well their knowledge and their expertise in working in Bangladesh. What are the challenges they are actually facing and how they can work together to save those, to, I would say, sort out those challenges and share better learnings on a more localized approach, which is of course key in when we talk about water and when we talk about ecosystem. It's looking at really contextualized approach, and in this case, more specifically in Bangladesh. So that's one of the projects we're working on, and it's development at the moment, but definitely looking into working more collaboratively with brands to develop this type of initiative where collective action can also solve some ecosystem issue, but as well combined with wash approaches.
Great. Thank you, Laurent. Always exciting to see when companies tap into nature-based solutions, such as the rainwater harvesting example that you mentioned. This wraps up our second theme, and now we'll move on to our last theme, that is green recovery. We do have limited time; we just have 10 minutes. So I will request my panelists if they could, brief their responses and share what kind of opportunities exist in the textile sector to build back better and for green finance. So Kim, H&M has recently released sustainability-linked bonds. Would you like to tell us what are those and how can they be accessed?
Sure, this is my favorite topic, so it's a shame that I don't have time now, but stop me if I go over that. I mean, this was our first bond ever, firstly. It became very successful when we got it out there, and which is important for us because then we are able to offer good deals to our suppliers in their transition. And just briefly, a sustainability-linked bond is focusing on goals, sustainability goals instead of specific projects. A traditional bond is when you maybe are building a house, or you're doing energy efficiency activities or something like that. So a traditional bond has a lot more demands when it comes to administration and follow-up, while a sustainability-linked bond is much more forgiving from that perspective. You can use the money however you want, but you just have to live up to the goals that you have promised. So this was really key for us when we did this, because we started to look for projects when we decided to issue our first bond. We started with a traditional bond, and then we quickly realized that we are not going to build a huge house and somewhere. It's not that kind of money, so we can't create a traditional bond. So we have to do maybe hundreds or if not thousands of smaller projects together with our supply chain, and it can differ. The amount of money can differ from a couple of 100,000 to many millions. So sustainability linked bond really was the solution for us then, where we instead could aim for on goals instead of specifics. So and you also asked how it could be accessed. I mean, first of all, the goals that we set up are focusing on three things. First, we created an industry-leading recycling goal, and then we focused on emissions in own operations. And then also, as the first company in our industry, at least, we focused on reductions in scope 3, which is very, very, very difficult to measure. And also, finances, these finances, these added finances, enable us to recruit our own energy efficiency team in our supply chain, and thereby avoiding or jumping over expensive consultants, enabling a better offer to our suppliers to do more for less money. We have built a green investment organization that will work with the suppliers, but also with technical suppliers, to make sure that each type of facility or setup will have the best possible proposals, both from a technical perspective, if it's solar, wind, or if it's solar thermal, or if it's energy efficiency activities, and combine that with financial solutions that can support the business case for the supplier, because that's what it's about. We have to create attractive business cases for the suppliers to do the investments needed to move away from bad energy to clean energy, to move away from high water usage to recycling for facilities and so on. So and on top of that, we implemented this internal carbon pricing to put a cost on each article depending on how much CO2 is connected to it. And the money from this setup will also go to investments throughout the supply chain. And the price, we will have a quite steep increase in this price during the coming years, making it more and more difficult for the buying organization, or not difficult, but it will be, the margins will be hurt if you purchase a high emitting raw material and produce it in a high emitting facility. Then your margins will be worse. So that will push towards new and better materials, impacting both the biodiversity and definitely the water, and also then the energy or the climate agenda. The investments will need innovative setups. And here there are many practical challenges that we're working with now daily, with because you can't really support a supplier. It wasn't, see and behold, it wasn't that easy that we thought to support our suppliers. If done wrong, it can have quite big impacts on taxations. It can be seen as we have take ownership of suppliers, which is not at all our intention. So there are a number of practical challenges. Yeah, but everything is about creating creative business cases for the suppliers. We can use our size to negotiate deals for them. We can take the risks on long-term agreements, and we can lend money in certain countries at least, and just making sure that the business case looks good enough for them to make the investments needed. And this is of course around both energy investments and water, and pushing them to do these things that they normally wouldn't do. I will be silent now.
Great. Thank you so much.
I could continue for hours about this. This is the best part.
Maybe we can have a separate session on this someday. Thank you so much, Kay. Marika, would you like to share how Cheapo is supporting its suppliers to upgrade their technology?
Yes, we also have actually many different approaches on how we support suppliers to improve their technology and how to move to green technology. Due to limited time, I will not go into too much detail here, but rather use this remaining time for a call of action, because within all these different projects and approaches to support the suppliers to change their technology, we again experience that it's so much more fruitful to collaborate instead of just working as an individual brand, because there are usually many different brands working with one supplier, and it's always important to work together collectively here. And also another important aspect, in my opinion, is to again not only work within the factory in the factory process, but also work outside the factory gate, include the riverbed, and work together collectively to transform the industry. So again, we are aiming to motivate more brands to commit to water stewardship, and we're hoping that many other companies in our sector commit to more water sustainability in order to drive change in a higher level as we could do with just a small brand like Cheapo alone.
Thank you so much, Marika. And absolutely, it's so important for everyone to get together and work on this. Payal, can you quickly walk us through the Bankable Nature Solutions Initiative of WWF?
Sure. Yes, I know we just have a few minutes. So, you know, we know that there is a huge funding gap to reach the SDGs, and, you know, there's a huge funding gap for conservation and ecosystem restoration. And what we really need is private investment. We just don't have enough funding from philanthropy and governments. So bankable nature solutions they're attractive, they're financially viable projects, and they also lead to improved biodiversity, climate resilience, and sustainable economies. Because they're bankable, you know, this means there's a high probability of success and for becoming financially sustainable. And, you know, they're really built around good business models. And they can be scaled up and replicated to realize large scale impact. So they're kind of a win-win for, you know, environmental challenges, but they also are designed for revenue generation. So this is, you know, something we're working on and developing. You know, we're excited for more opportunities in bankables because we really need, you know, investments of this kind. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry, everyone, for rushing you through. But so, Laurent, can you quickly, you know, tell what is the economic case for Bosch for companies?
Sure, I'll do very quickly. There is probably two levels. There's the I would say at the macro level. There's just a new research which I can share with everyone later on, which is called Mission Critical. And when we looked at the business case and actually the economical case for investing in wash, which can unlock trillions of dollars. I would say just basic water services could save women the equivalent of 77 million working days per year because they don't have to fetch water. And there's no a need to spend time fetching water, which they can dedicate to working and ensuring revenue gains. So in this perspective, there's like the economic and more macroeconomic case for wash. And we're looking at the moment at a micro level, looking with some partners like Diageo, Gap, HSBC, Unilever, and Twinings are funding a pioneering research where we're trying to strengthen the business case for corporate wash investments in supply chains. And so we're looking at what is the gain for businesses to invest in wash when there is a reduction of absenteeism, when there is a reduction of wash-related costs for factories or for workplaces. How does that translate in an investment in wash that can actually return some benefits or actually have some business value for the sector? So two elements where there's a potential to invest in wash with, I would say, an economic or a business case for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for briefly but comprehensively explaining it all. We're actually already 2 minutes over our session. We do have calls of action, but I think we can share it once we do a post-session blog with all our panelists. So with this, I'd like to thank all our panelists. Thank you so much for your valuable thoughts. And thank you so much, attendees, for tuning in. We have a couple of questions in the chat box, but we can address it in our post-session blog. With this, I will sign off. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. And I hope that you were able to understand what opportunities exist in the sector for businesses to create value. I'd like to wish you all a good day and good night. Bye.